find me in this darkness? Who alone can help me stand? You could make a way to find me, even love me as I am. Your love is enough. Your love is enough.
Good morning. Thank you. I don't really have a whole lot as far as announcements other than I went to go make a cup of coffee and realized that I put the machine together wrong, so it's just hot water. But there's snacks. And we have tea bags if you want to use the hot water and make tea. I guess I don't really have anything else other than that. Yeah. Oh, it is Father's Day. You're right. Happy Father's Day to all of the dads in the room. We appreciate you very much. I did not forget. I just didn't think about making an announcement. So thank you so much, Asher. I appreciate that. Let's pray, and then we will get started. God, just thank you that we're able to come together this morning and just be in a safe space for those of us who might not feel safe in a whole lot of places. I just pray that as we are here today, we're able to find community, find grace and peace, and are able to take it with us into our week and into our lives. Just be with us this morning as we close out this series on Jesus and nonviolence. In your name, amen. Okay, so this is our final sermon for our Jesus and nonviolence series, and I'm kind of combining the Jesus and nonviolence and the parable series that this was supposed to be, and we're going to kind of talk about both, because I think the idea of Jesus and nonviolence really shows up all across Jesus' life, in the stories that he tells, in the way that he interacts with people. His Sermon on the Mount, obviously we've touched on that pretty extensively, but today we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 10, which is a parable that most of us know by heart, whether you grew up in the church or not. So we're going to turn there, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So like I said, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about nonviolence, and we've had a lot of really good conversation, and I like that we're kind of all coming from different places. We all have different ideas, and we're all contributing, and I really appreciate all of you participating in our discussions, even when we don't necessarily agree with each other. I appreciate that we can have grace and peace and still have these open conversations. I think it's really important that we talk about these things, especially when we don't agree. And as we kind of move forward in learning how to live this as a way of life, because we're not going to agree with everyone. And if we can be in a space that we call a safe space as grace and peace and disagree and find a way to move forward together, I think that's the intention, to carry that out in our lives. So that was my intention with this whole series, was to learn something new from each other and to learn something new from Jesus. But before we can be done talking about Jesus and nonviolence, we have to talk about what it means to be a neighbor and the way that Jesus defined being a neighbor and what it means to Jesus to love your neighbor. So let's pick up in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. We're going to be looking today at the story of the Good Samaritan. So I'm going to read it first. You should have a copy in your bulletin. If not, you can look at your phone like I'm doing, because I left my Bible in the car. Okay. And behold, a lawyer stood up to him to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength, and with all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But he, the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" He, the lawyer, said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said, "You go and do likewise." So, like I said, we pretty much all know this story by heart, whether you grew up in the church or not. At the very least, you know the context of it. We kind of, as a culture, take this term Good Samaritan and equate it with a person who does good deeds. There's an extensive number of charitable organizations that have the title Samaritan or Good Samaritan in their name. Just to name a few, there's Samaritans International, Good Samaritan Hospital, Good Samaritan Donkey Organization, Samaritan's Purse. I could go on. There's so many of them. And they all do different things. And they're charitable towards different groups or animals even. But this parable is so well known that anyone can really kind of recall the story or at least know what it's about. It's everywhere. And this focus on the Samaritan's good deed, while not necessarily wrong, diminishes the whole point of the story to just doing charity work, basically. But there's a lot more that we miss when we're so focused on just the charitable acts of this person, of the Samaritan. So I think we have to go back and hear the story as best we can, as a first century Jewish audience would have heard it. So first and foremost, I think it's important that we look at the context surrounding this story. This story starts with a conversation. So a man who is a lawyer comes to Jesus and asks him a question. And in true Jesus form, he responds by answering the question with a question, which we see in verse 25, where the lawyer says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" It's important that we notice that throughout the book of Luke, Luke doesn't particularly like lawyers, and he paints them kind of in a bad light. He makes them seem like the bad guy when he talks about them most often. And we can kind of see a few notes of this in the story, this particular story. So from the very beginning, Luke puts this guy as saying that he's testing Jesus. And he uses the same word, testing, that he uses in Luke 4 when he talks about Satan testing Jesus. And so we can kind of see maybe some parallels between those two. By using this language, Luke is kind of putting the lawyer into the position of the devil here in the story. He's testing Jesus in the same way. And then we also see, secondly, that the lawyer calls Jesus teacher, whereas those who followed him and trusted his authority would have more commonly referred to him as Lord. So by calling him teacher, the lawyer is kind of maybe not so sure about his authority, or maybe kind of saying, like, you're not above me, you don't know more than me, we're more on the same kind of playing field. So this address suggests that the lawyer doesn't respect his authority. And then lastly, the way that this question is phrased, it's as if the lawyer's kind of checking to see, like, kind of, it's almost like a gotcha question, right? Like he's trying to make Jesus stumble. Like, there's not an answer to this question, right? So what are you going to say? Because there's no good way to answer the question. Basically, the lawyer's asking if he thinks Jesus knows the answer, knowing that there isn't one, right? So Jesus responds to this question, obviously with a question, and he says, "What is written in the law?" He's using what the lawyer knows, the law, and having him not only explain what the law says, what's written down, but how the lawyer interprets it. Jesus wants to know what this guy's answer would be. And he answers with quotes straight from the Torah, which is the book of law that this lawyer would have studied and known pretty extensively. It was the scriptures of that time period. But the Torah doesn't talk about eternal life. So what he's getting at here is kind of ambiguous, right? The Torah doesn't address this. No one's really, this idea of eternal life isn't kind of something that Jewish people would have talked about. It wasn't really on their radar. The Torah more addresses what it's like to live in the here and now, what it's like to love, what it's like to be in grace and peace. The main concern of Torah is mostly love. Love your neighbor, and not how to get into heaven, like this lawyer is asking. So the lawyer quotes Deuteronomy 6 and Leviticus 19 when he says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your soul and with all of your strength and with all of your mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself." Of course, the lawyer's answer is correct. Jesus even tells him that. But the lawyer's question hasn't really been answered. And he says, no, I have another question, because this isn't what I was asking, right? And he pushes. He keeps asking. He says, okay, well, if that's your answer, then can you define who my neighbor is? It's almost like the lawyer is saying, okay, if you can define who my neighbor is, I can define who my neighbor isn't. So if you're telling me I have to love this group of people, then it's okay for me to not love this group of people, right? Again, this is a gotcha question. The Torah finds later on in chapter Leviticus 19, if you skip down to verse 34, the Torah defines the neighbor as the alien who resides with you to be citizens among you. So the lawyer knows the Torah's answer, the law's answer to this question. He's waiting to see what Jesus has to say. And Jesus kind of throws everybody for a loop in his response when he responds with a story. So in the story that Jesus tells, he tells the story of a person that's been robbed. And he doesn't give any descriptors to this person. We don't know their name. We don't know nationality. We don't know their status. Like, are they wealthy? Are they poor? We have no idea. And Luke uses he pronouns, but I don't know that we can even really necessarily live by that. We could say that this is just a person that's been robbed. That is all we know. So we're going to just leave it at that blanket. This is a person that has been robbed. And they were walking down from Jerusalem, meaning they're leaving Jerusalem. And I think Jesus is vague on purpose. He doesn't give this person any descriptors. He doesn't want to give anybody any reason to say, oh, this is why they were robbed, or oh, this is why they didn't help him. So this road from Jerusalem to Jericho is well known as something that's a kind of a dangerous place. And Jesus saying walking down from Jerusalem to Jericho would have been kind of like if we were telling a story and said somebody got lost in Compton. Like, I have never been to Compton. I'm sure most of you have never been to Compton. But you can kind of get a picture in your head of like, oh, that sounds scary. In the very least, right? So that's kind of what Jesus is saying here. Like, this is a scary place. This wouldn't have been a story that couldn't have actually happened, right? Like, this is something that was very likely and probably did happen often. People got robbed on this road. So anyone hearing this story would have known exactly what Jesus was kind of getting at here, just based on the stories that they had heard. So this person finds himself in a shady part of town. They're robbed, and then they're just left for dead. And then we're introduced to two characters that just kind of pass by, a priest and a Levite. And this is where stereotypes get in the way. And I think that we need to break down what would have the first century Jewish audience have heard when they heard these terms. Because when we hear a priest and a Levite, we immediately think someone that's wealthy and someone that is very religious. And a lot of times when you hear people preach on this passage, they say that the priest and the Levite were under very strict cleansing rituals because they were going to the temple and they weren't allowed to touch a dead body. Or some sort of religious justification why they had to pass around, why they couldn't interact with this guy who was most likely dead. But Jewish scholar Amy Jill Levine states that this is actually incorrect because cleansing rituals would have been irrelevant in this situation. Priests and Levites are required to stop and assist aid, like a nurse or a doctor or a paramedic would be required to stop and assist if they come across a car accident. Even if they're off duty, they're required to stop. So priests and Levites would have fallen under that same kind of requirement. Secondly, they're coming down from Jerusalem. You never go down to the temple, you always go up to the temple. Even if, like, geographically you're going up in elevation, you always go up to the temple. So if they're coming down from Jerusalem, it means they're leaving. So they are no longer under those requirements to be clean because they've done their job and they're going home, right? So they're not under the strict cleansing rituals in the first place. Never mind the fact that they're required to stop and assist. So if we strip this kind of narrative away of why they're avoiding the person who's presumably dead in the ditch, if we strip away all of their religion from it, it kind of leaves this, like, there's not really a reason. Like, why would you not stop? And Martin Luther King Jr. actually claims that the two didn't stop out of fear. And he says this: if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan thought something different. He thought, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? So Martin Luther King claims that they didn't stop out of fear. They were scared. This man was robbed. Who knows how close these robbers are? Maybe they're waiting for someone to stop. Maybe they're waiting for this guy to die. Who knows? So they avoided out of fear. And I think that that's actually pretty likely. But whatever the case, we don't know why they stopped. If they don't stop for religious duties, if they stop because of fear, whatever the case may be. But if they aren't stopping for religious reasons, why give them religious titles in the first place? Jesus is making this story up. It's not something that actually happened, as far as we know. So why didn't he just say, like, some random person? It could have been anybody. But Jesus is using what's called the rule of three here. So a rule of three is a literary technique where you're establishing a pattern. So people would have known what to expect. So think, for example, the Three Little Pigs or Goldilocks and the Three Bears. By the third one, you kind of like know exactly what's going to happen. You know the story, how the story's going to unfold. So the rule of three, as Israelites would have understood it, would have been a Levite, a priest, and an Israelite. So Jesus is telling this story, and everybody's going in with the expectation. They know exactly what's coming. Jesus is getting to the third person, and they're going to assume that it's an Israelite. And then he throws everything off and says, a Samaritan. So who were Samaritans to the Jewish audience, right? He's telling a parable here, and the intention of parables is to provoke. So he changed things up to provoke something in his audience. Instead of naming the expected, he's naming a Samaritan. And although we think of Samaritans as these really good, humble people that are kind of an oppressed minority, the Jewish audience wouldn't have thought of that. A first century Jew would have thought of Samaritan as a terrorist, as someone who hated them, and they hated each other, right? Like, there wasn't any one group that was a particular minority. They hated each other, and they were constantly at odds with each other. They didn't agree with the way that they had established their religion. They didn't agree with the books that they decided to use as the Bible. They couldn't agree on anything, and instead of just agreeing to disagree, if you will, they decided that the other needed to be eliminated. So they were constantly at odds with one another. So think of it this way. This is akin to kind of like if someone was using language that we would understand today. It's like Jesus was telling a story of Larry, Curly, and Osama bin Laden. Like, right? We would all assume that Larry, Curly, and Mo, which is, I know, a lot older than me. I grew up watching that show. But so assume that instead of saying Mo, it's like saying Osama bin Laden. It's very unexpected, and it's a very large jump. It would have like spiked the radar in Jesus' audience big time. They would have seen the Samaritan as the enemy. And this is where the story really kind of shifts gears and begins to change pace, where Jesus gives no detail to the person in the ditch. He gives extensive detail to the Samaritan. This person offers aid. We know their nationality, they're Samaritan. We know that they're at least of moderate wealth. They are traveling, they have the means and the money to travel, first of all. They're traveling with an animal. And they're also traveling with oil, which is something that most people wouldn't have ready access to. So this person is of at least moderate wealth. And then they have the skills to be able to negotiate and barter with the person at the inn. They're allowing this person to say, and then they say, whatever costs that you incur or accrue, I'll be able to pay back. So he is trusting the innkeeper with this person that's been found in the ditch, and the innkeeper is trusting the Samaritan to be able to pay them back in the end. The Samaritan does more than just check to see if the person is alive, which is what would have been expected. The priest and the Levite were only obligated to check to see if he was alive, if the person in the ditch was alive. And that was kind of the full extent of it. But the Samaritan goes above and beyond that. They offer not just care in that moment, but they offer long-term care. They're not just saying, like, here, I'll take you to the hospital down the street. No, I'm going to make sure that you have the care that you need, and I'm going to pay for it. They're going above and beyond. This demonstrates that loving the neighbor is continual. It involves trust amongst everyone involved, and it involves ongoing sacrifice. The Samaritan trusts the innkeeper. The innkeeper trusts the Samaritan, and the Israelite trusts the Samaritan. So now we return back to the conversation between Jesus and the lawyer, where Jesus is asked, Jesus asked the lawyer, who was the neighbor here? And the lawyer is so wrapped up in his hatred that he can't even say the word Samaritan. He can't say that the neighbor was a Samaritan. He says the one who showed mercy instead. And Jesus tells him to go and to do likewise. Not be, not exist, but do. Do as the Samaritan. And we don't know how the lawyer responds. We don't know if he changes his thinking. We don't know if he changes his way of life. We don't know if he's mad because Jesus gave him a non-answer or the answer that he didn't want, or he didn't stump Jesus the way that he expected to have stumped Jesus, right? We don't know how the lawyer responds. We can only know how we respond. So how would we respond to this story within this context? Jesus is defining the neighbor here technically as the enemy, right? At least the enemy in their eyes. The Jews would have seen Samaritans as the enemy, yet Jesus is painting the enemy as someone capable of doing good. Rather than doing harm, as would be expected, the Samaritan is the one to show love and compassion, grace and peace, something that no one would have expected. Jesus is urging his followers yet again to recognize the humanity in even those who hate us, those we expect to do evil, those we expect to offer the complete opposite of grace and peace. Amy Jill Levine poses the question in regards to this parable. Can we finally agree that It's better to acknowledge the humanity and the potential to do good in the enemy rather than to choose death. Imagine the potential of being able to bind up our enemy's wounds or to have them do the same for us. So this part of the world, Israelites and Samaritans are actually still at odds with each other. They have been for like as long as we can go back. So to paint this story in kind of more modern terms so that we can see exactly the extent of what Jesus was saying here, I think we should look at this part of the world and how they interact with each other today. So Samaria today is what we know as occupied Palestine, and Israel is still Israel. So the traveler would have been coming from Israel on their way to Jerusalem. This person would have been a Jew, from Jerusalem to Jericho, and when they're attacked by the robbers. And those who pass by, instead of being an Israelite or a priest, would be comparable to like a Jewish medic who it works for the Israeli Defense Force, or a missionary from the United States. And then the person to stop and assist aid would be a Hamas sympathizer, a Palestinian Muslim. Hamas is a political party that looks for the destruction of Israel. And both Israel and Palestine are at odds with each other. They're both still fighting to stake claim over the land, to stake claim over who's right and who's wrong. So the least expected person to stop and help would be the Hamas sympathizer. Neither party is particularly marginalized, rather they have equal hate for one another. So in today's terms, this story would be titled The Good Hamas Member, which provokes an entirely new meaning to the way we have defined Good Samaritan. So let's go up into this week and let's choose life. For ourselves, for others, the way that we interact with each other. I think that living in the third way requires, yes, fighting oppression and having conversations and being creative in how we choose to comply with laws that are harmful. But I think that this is the reality of living this in the day in and day out. This is the hard part. For me, anyways, this is the hard part. I can stand up for people that I think are being oppressed all day and use my voice for that. But the hard part is loving the people who are hateful, loving the people that I don't agree with, and choosing to be there for them, choosing to love them in the way that I interact with them, choosing to love them when they're the ones being harmed. No matter how much my mind might say I think that they deserve it, choosing to love them anyway. So we're going to do a discussion and then we're going to go into communion. But I want to hear your thoughts kind of on this story. I know that this is something that we've all heard, right? So we typically identify the Samaritan with the Samaritan in this story, because that's just the way that we've been kind of conditioned to see ourselves in the shoes of the Samaritan. But the first century Jewish audience would have put themselves in the position of the person being attacked on the street. So how does changing the character that you identify with change the meaning of the story? Be it you identify with the person in the ditch, you identify with the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan. Does that change the story for you at all?
I guess I've always tried to think of the Samaritan as, that person or group of people that I've struggled with the most, like as far as thinking of as good.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in current context it would be like the alt-right person or something, like I'm trying to think of like God, Jesus's point is, to kind of subvert expectations there and to look at like what are the actions actually of that person instead of what do you think about them, what do you know about them. So yeah, I think like you said, Osama bin Laden or a terrorist or alt-right person or something, someone that we feel like we have nothing in common with, but we can still look at their actions and still think of like how do we interpret this person as possibly doing good things,
Yeah.
And the fact that a group of people
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just lump everybody in. So I think it's kind of what that's all about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to seeing the humanity in everyone. Because just like marginalized groups don't want to be grouped all together, whether you're grouping them together for good or for bad or for harm, the more, I would say, predominant groups don't want that either, right? Like to just put everybody in a category. Nobody wants to be categorized. You want to be seen as a person, no matter what group you fall in. Yeah.
And to believe that someone's capable of good,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even if we have our mind made up about them,
Mm-hmm.
where they come from. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's natural. I mean, our brains kind of work that way, right? Like from like little children, we start to just kind of put people in groups. That's how our brain like makes sense of things. And so I don't want you to think that there's something wrong with you because you're like, well, like this is how I think of this group of people or whatever. But I think what Jesus is saying here is like, open yourselves up to the opportunity to have conversations and have relationships with people that you don't agree with. As an Israelite, have relationships with Samaritans, and see that they're human too, and that everybody's just fighting for the good that they think should be reality. And obviously, Jesus wouldn't urge us to put ourselves in harm's way or enter into an abusive relationship. But I think more so it's just seeing the humanity in everyone and the potential for good. And if we can trust that God is good and His goodness is in everyone and everything, then we can all grow together. Some of us are in totally different places on the timeline, and growth isn't linear, right? So maybe they are stronger than us and they've grown more in some area, whereas we have some work to do.
One of the more like interesting parts of this story to me is that like it's kind of like you don't really know why they didn't stop because like it doesn't make a ton of sense.
Mm-mm.
Like because like if that person was a Jew, then like it doesn't make a ton of sense why they wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering why he set it up that way.
Yeah. I don't know. I've wondered that too. Like, if it was one of your friends or someone that you recognized or just someone that you, like, was a part of the group that you claimed to be a part of, you would stop and help.
Yeah, that may have not been his point for the story though, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point was like people don't always act the way you expect them to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So these people that you expected to do things don't always do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this person you expect not to do the right thing does the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
That may be just as simple as that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to that, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the priest or the Levite and everything. I wonder, like, in today's age and everything, like, I feel like all the way that you see all this injustice and all this badness happening is through, like, things like social media and stuff like that. So, like, although I might not be seeing it directly, I see it in that way. And I'm still responding in a lot of the same ways that they did. Like, I'm doing nothing about it. So I wonder how responding differently, like, how I could be that good Samaritan, like, and I don't know, I'm curious what everybody thinks, like, how to respond to those kind of things
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah. I think that's the hard part, is putting yourselves in the position of the Levite. We all want to think that we would be the good Samaritan if we came across someone that was dead, or at least assumed to be dead. Like, we would at least check and be like, do they have some ID? Like, is there somebody that I can call? But we see a lot of injustice every day, online, even just in passing. And a lot of us, because we don't know what to do, because we're scared, because we don't want to lose our positions at work or at school or in our social status, by intervening, we just don't do anything or pretend like we didn't see it. And I think a lot of times we put ourselves in the shoes of the priest and the Levite. We're too busy, or whatever number of excuses we could come up with to do nothing. Yeah.
It's too late, or we can't.
Yeah. So my voice isn't like, what am I gonna do? Yeah.
Can't do it.
It's a real concern, what resources you do have. If the Samaritan had been begging for food, they couldn't have helped
Right.
the, that person in the same way. So he used someone who had resources as
Mhm.
the example. I was talking to my mom last night about how food pantries are like begging for donations right now because all the costs have gone up and more people are trying to get resources from there. And we were talking about how like we don't feel like we have a lot to give, but maybe we have like 4 or 5 things in our pantry that we could donate. Like we
Yeah.
don't have $100 to give. We can't maybe purchase somebody's all the groceries they need for a week, but
But
what
if-
can we do?
If everybody gave 5 cans of corn or whatever. Yeah.
It's kind of the all or nothing
Mm-hmm.
Right.
problem. Like,
Yeah.
if I can't fix it completely, then why even bother?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in the context of like all of Jesus's parables, a lot of his parables address the idea of like if you come from resource, if you come from wealth, it's your obligation to spread that, not to hoard it for yourself. He actually like admonishes people for doing that. So this is just another way of him saying like, if you have the resource, you can't keep it for yourself. You have to be the one to stop. You have to be the one to help, because it has to be a collective effort. We can't survive alone. We can't. Because if you don't need the food bank today, you might next week. You might a month from now. You never know. And you're going to hope that someone gives their 5 cans that they had extra, because it might be all that you have access to. How are we on time? Okay. What kind of response does this idea that those who want to kill you might be the only ones who will save you invoke for you when you hear that idea?
I mean, I guess like those who like you think want to kill you, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea that those who want to kill you may be the only ones who will be able to save you, or who will save you.
So I was kind of trying to think about that as I'm thinking about the story, right? And if you're lying in a ditch, and the only person that's going to come help you is this person that you've been trained all your life to think is an evil person, they're helping you. I think that's a moment for an epiphany for one, but it's also you're going to be thankful.
Yeah.
Because you'll take whatever you can get when you can get it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this person's fattening me up for the slaughter later.
Yeah.
I'm going to be grateful and realize that, first of all, maybe I'm wrong
Mm-hmm.
to think the way I've been thinking all along, and it's maybe a sign of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's how, put yourself in that position. It's like, wow, I saw these guys walk by that should help me, and they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all I got.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine the fear of like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst that could have happened has happened, and now I'm here and I'm like totally helpless, and the last person I want to walk by right now is coming over to me. I can imagine that fear of like, I'm already almost dead, like they're just gonna finish it off. And then just the vast amount of emotion to go from like, they're just gonna finish this off to what is happening? Like, why are you the one helping me when everyone else that would have helped, that should have helped, that was required to stop and help, they didn't?
I imagine feeling guilty too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've had all these beliefs about this group of people, and I've been wrong about this person.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the one really getting saved? The one in the ditch, the one pulling him out of the ditch?
Both.
I would say more so the one pulling him out, because how did he say, how do you get to heaven?
Mm-hmm.
You have to show mercy.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to love.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the person who's pulling him out of the ditch that's securing his eternity.
Mm-hmm.
By being able to find his heart. And that goes back to Ezekiel, where it says, I'll create you a new heart, I'll remove the one of stone. and I'll give you one flesh and blood. That can, you know, so maybe that's the twist he wanted to give the lawyer, because I do see lawyers as pariahs a lot of times. Maybe that was the message he was intending, particularly to the lawyer.
Yeah.
You need to change.
Yeah.
You know.
You need to love the people that you're trying to throw in jail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's a process.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a process.
Mm-hmm. And every day is different, right? Like,
Yeah.
just like growth isn't linear, neither is forgiveness. There's one day you're like, I can forgive, and then the next day or the next minute you're like, no, I can't.
Funny thing about the parables is that there's so many different ways you can look at it. It's I use this term a lot, the different seat in the theater. It's, you know, you see the show on the stage, but when you sit from different seats in the theater, you see the show in a different way. And to me, that's kind of how parables are. So
Yeah.
you can look at it from each person's perspective, and if you really think about it, reflect on it, contemplate on it, you can come up with different ideas every time.
And I think that was the whole point, and I think that's why Jesus left it vague.
That's what good teaching is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You come to your own conclusion. Yeah. And Jesus was a good teacher. I mean, that's what he's remembered for, right? He was a good storyteller. And I think growing up, I was always taught that the Bible was like constantly growing and changing and like speaking new things to new time periods. And for a long time, I didn't think that I believed that anymore. And I don't know that I believe it the way that I was taught it. But I do think that as we gain different contexts, we do see truth in these stories from different angles. Yeah, absolutely.
And because that's what I think is that when it goes back to the scripture of His word is living and active and breathing, and it's His Spirit that is guiding us to this truth of He.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And just like growing up, I saw this story as doing good deeds, and while that's not wrong, and there's still good in that, and there's still truth in that. Now I see it more as love and forgiveness, and grace and peace and patience. And trusting people that we've been taught to hate.
I like how grounded the goodness is too. You know, it's not like, you know, a Samaritan doesn't walk up to him, "Are you saved?"
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can only help you if.
Yeah. Do you know our Savior Jesus Christ? Like, it's about actually meeting the physical needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the goodness. Like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he doesn't say like, stay here, and then when you're done and when you're better, like, we're going to change your mind, and you're going to believe what I believe. Yeah. It's just I'll pay for your care, and then when you can go on your way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting, like you gave one current example of like the groups of people that might align with the priest and the Levite and the Samaritan, but for every individual, those groups could be different.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I mean, the people of Ukraine would probably think that the people of Russia would all be the Samaritans, and people in Iraq and Afghanistan might think that about Americans.
And vice versa.
Some people would probably even think that about Christians.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
You are, and what your experience has been, how you view the story.
Mm-hmm. And what you've been taught, because, you know, like we were talking about, like labeling groups and saying like everybody in this group is this way. If you've never had interactions with people in that group and you've just been taught like this entire group is bad. I was reading a story yesterday from a lady who was saying the entire group of LGBTQ people is demonic, and they're like, they have an agenda and they want to like ruin the children. And if you grow up hearing those things, you're going to be scared of that entire group of people. When the people in the LGBT community just have so much love, and they want to be loved for who they are. And like you said, that could go in any direction, just depending on the context that you grew up in.
Well, one of the interviews that I was halfway listening to the other day about with Ukraine is there was a person on there and they were saying, I never really thought I could hate somebody enough to kill them. I can't believe I can hate somebody this much, was one of the things that they were saying. And so, going along with what we're talking about, is Jesus teaching us how to do the reset button? How do we get to a place where we can hit a reset button in what we think and go a different direction to it?
Yeah.
And they really hate that person versus, because they don't know that person, they know the ideology. The ideology, and that poor opposite soldier could be an 18-year-old that just had no choice.
Right.
But to be at that place at that moment, I can't comprehend that they hate that person.
So I guess maybe the interview was they were trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah.
How can I hate? How can I hate this much?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you think about like the positions that they're in. There's so many factors that are outside of their control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going through, and Holly knows this, a real life this weekend. Holly and I have been family, adopted family.
This is my best friend.
For years and years. I came down from Wichita Falls this weekend to celebrate with them. Since the beginning of COVID, there's a disabled family that I've been helping. It was like instinctive. I will do your shopping. What do you need? Well, she injured her back, and I've been there all week. And I told her ahead of time, I'm going down to Dallas. Call your daughter, see if she'll come up on Saturday. Well, and I made arrangements. My husband will take you to your doctor's appointment. Did everything Thursday night. Anything else I can do before we go? No, you've done enough. Well, she got a bad diagnosis. She is in a lot of pain. Well, I'd barely gotten here, and she called and said, you have to come home. And I said, Pat, I've got plans. I need to do something down here. And that was celebratory, but a time-sensitive appointment came up in Dallas also. And I said, I don't want to go home and come back on, for a Wednesday appointment. And you have to. I was like, what do you need? I can call Elaine. I can get my husband to come over. Tell me what you need. I just need you. And I said, but I can't do anything to fix. She has a fracture in the back. I said, I can't do anything for that. I know it hurts, but I can't. And I'm just very torn. She says she needs me. I've got plans, and I'm willing to try to make anything happen up there. Does it have to be me? And it's a horrible feeling. Obviously, I'm still here. And I don't, there's no win-win
Yeah.
in the situation. So it's a hard choice, a hard life to live when you don't think, do I sacrifice myself completely and say, I'm not going to do the things that still need to be done, or, be there because she wants me.
Sometimes we can be the Good Samaritan and the person in the ditch at the same time. And if you need saving, you need to allow yourself to be saved. And sometimes that means that the other people that need saving have to take a break. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. He sent 3 people. Maybe we need help every
Yeah.
every day you see people who need you to stop and help them.
Yeah, absolutely.
day,
If you
multiple
stop and
people.
save every single person, you're going to drown.
So maybe it's every
Yeah.
third person.
Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Mhm.
And so in those works, he knows what's going on. We're called to do that. And at the end of the day, if we're feeling our falling path, he's going to put you where you weren't supposed to be so that you get it accomplished. Maureen, I need you. You were here for me today, whether you did the work or not.
Yeah.
You've done your business.
Sometimes I think if we don't have the resources, like Emily was saying,
Yeah.
we just get down in the ditch with the, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It goes like into the realm of like boundaries, like
Oh,
you
absolutely.
can't, like, be effective as like to serve others if like
You're serving everyone.
if like your mental health is compromised, or
Yeah.
your time is compromised, or your resources or whatever. Like
Yeah. And I mean, resources absolutely is not just monetary, right? It's your mental health, your emotional health, your time.
I think like the point of the story that he was trying to get across, like going with that, is that like all the people he mentioned had resources,
Mhm.
and they chose
Not to use them.
Two people had resources and like the time, and they just chose not to help.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Yes, Janice.
Well, I think to her point too, the person in the ditch didn't say, "Oh, priest, no, I need this other person. Oh no, Levite, no, I'm waiting for a better person to come along." The one that I, always go to. No, that person in the ditch was grateful for the help that they got.
Oh, yeah.
It was legitimately in the ditch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The robbers came.
Yeah. So when we're helping other people and we can be empathetic and empathic and all that stuff toward what they're going through, we also have to set our own boundaries. In order for me to better help you when I get home, I need to take care of me right now.
Mhm.
And I've set up things for you to be taken care of. And you can't choose necessarily who's going to come along when you're in that ditch.
Mhm.
There's that sense of gratitude that can keep us from really experiencing what's around us in a given moment if we don't have that sense of gratitude.
Yeah. I think that was a better sermon than I gave. That was good. Okay, I'm being told this time. So we're going to transition into communion. And again, just kind of as we talked about throughout the series, as we break bread and pour out the blood, kind of as we talk about it, it's just a reminder that grace and peace and love are for everyone. And the table is open and you are welcome. Jesus isn't exclusive, right? He broke his body and he poured out his blood for all of us to have a better world, to live in a place where one day we don't have to oppress each other. We don't have to constantly be at odds with one another, where we can live in grace and peace together. So let's celebrate that today. And like we've talked about, as we celebrate it, we bring it into reality. We bring it into the here and now with every act of love and grace and peace that we share. We bring it into reality. So we have gluten-free and regular juice and wine. You are welcome to participate whenever you feel comfortable.
The goodness of the Lord is the kindness of the Lord. With every breath we take, the gift of life and grace.
Thank you so much for being here with us this week. There are offering boxes in the back if you want to give. Grace and peace be with you.